Good afternoon and welcome to the ALCTS webinar, Effective Subscription Management and Alternatives. My name is Cindy Hepfer and I'm a member of the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee and your host for today. Our presenters are Deborah Lenares and Steve Smith from Wellesley College. Deborah is Acquisition Serials, Resource Sharing, and Collection Manager for the Sciences. Steve is Manager of Collection Management in the Preservation Group. I, for one, am looking forward to hearing them discuss their method for collecting and analyzing cost and use data when evaluating a journal collection and their ideas about sound subscription alternatives. Please feel free to type questions into the question box on your screen at any time. Deborah and Steve will answer the questions at the end of their presentation. Excuse me. Today's session is being recorded. Attendees will receive an email with a link to the recording and the PowerPoint slides shortly after the conclusion of the webinar. The ALCTS CE Committee invites you to use the Twitter back channel you see on the screen to interact with other participants during the webinar. However, please continue to submit questions for the presenters in the question box on the webinar screen. Neither the presenters nor I will monitor Twitter during the presentation. There will now be a brief delay as I turn the presentation over to our speakers.
Okay, hi, we're getting ready to go. Is that, we're here? Okay.
So welcome, I'm Steve Smith. I'm the Manager of Collections and Preservation at Wellesley College, and Deborah Lenares will be speaking with you today as well. She's the Manager of Acquisitions, Serials and Resource Sharing at Wellesley College. She's also the Collection Manager for the Sciences. And so what we're going to be talking about today is effective subscription management and alternatives. Just a quick overview of the subjects we'll be going through. We'll be talking about the problem, which, as you all know, is linked to things like rising serial costs, the number of serials that are now available, and hopefully we'll be presenting you with some useful solutions, ways that you can effectively manage your serials, your subscriptions. We're going to spend most of the time talking about using data to manage subscriptions, and I think this is really the key point, how to make sound decisions based on how your collection's used. We're going to talk about first compiling the data. How do you put it all together? Analyzing the data. Once you have it together, what does it all mean? And then we're going to look at how to address the issues of big deals. How do you look at the use and compare costs around those trickier large publishers' packages? We'll also go through some alternatives to subscriptions and the very important part about communicating access changes to your user population. So that's what we'll be talking about. All the concepts we're talking about apply to pretty much everybody, any institution. We're going to be talking about what we've done, obviously, within the context of our own institution, Wellesley College. We're a small, highly selective undergraduate college. One of the things, just to give you sort of our credentials, since 2008, we've had 650 journal cancellation, title cancellations. In that same period, we've been able to add over 4,000 titles through using a variety of these strategies. Some of those are direct subscriptions. Some of them have been negotiated package titles, and also like using PayPerView as an alternative. But these are all titles and not titles included in databases. So we've been able to really, using the use data as both a means to make decisions and also as a negotiating tool, we've really been, I feel, quite successful in actually expanding access that our users have, while at the same time we've been able to reduce our serials budget by 20% in the same time period. So Deborah's going to talk to you about kind of the problems and the solutions, and I'll turn it over to her.
Hi, so this is a chart. You don't really need to pay very close attention to this chart. I just included this because it's sort of typical, a typical chart that shows the steep incline in cereals prices from the late 80s through, this chart goes through 2006, so at least the early 2000s. So this is just in here as a little memory jogger for all of us who've been doing this for a while, that part of the context of some of the decisions that we're making is within this the cereals price increases. So and we're seeing more of the conversation around this coming up today. Now faculty and administrators seem to be jumping on the bandwagon of prices are too high and something needs to be done about it. So during the same time period of the 80s and 90s and the early 2000s is the same, when prices were going dramatically up, this was the same period where we were beginning to transition to electronic journals. And at that time, back in the 90s, there was a lot of hope that the transition to electronic journals would solve the pricing problem because the production and distribution costs that are associated with print journals would be eliminated. But we did not see a drop in prices, and many librarians were very, and are still, very angry and disappointed about this. But what we're going to talk about today is that although the journal publishers did not drop prices based on electronic delivery, we as librarians have been given a whole new set of tools that put some of the power of journal management in our hands. And we now have the use data to really show us which journals in our collections are being used. And when we look at cost per use for those titles, we can really determine whether the sacred cow that the faculty demand could never be canceled is really worthwhile to continue or not. And so e-journals have really given us new methods to make some better purchasing decisions. That plus the new ways of purchasing content that provide immediate access to content at the article level are producing some very interesting and sometimes cheaper alternatives to subscriptions. So we're going to show you some of the strategies that we've used here to reduce our spending and increase our access. And Steve's going to begin showing some of the ways we look at our cost and use data.
All right. So first, we're going to spend some time just going through and how we use how we do this here. Again, it's not that. As a concept, it's a very simple thing. We have with our electronic journals, and this means e-only or e plus print, but as long as we have electronic access to it, we should have use data for it, standardized use data. That is, it has to be data that obviously that you can compare across all titles, and thankfully we do have this through Counter using the JR1. I'll talk about that a little bit more. And we also need, of course, cost data, which we should all have. We will be using this. We would be generating cost per use title and looking at use to target both titles with high cost per use and also to target low use titles themselves. And one of the reasons I just want to mention that is that when we did our bigger serials review 2 years ago, we ended up canceling a lot of low-use titles that had a low cost. So they might have had 5 uses, but the journal itself only cost $80. They were coming in with a fairly low cost per use, but it was overall just a low use of titles. And I think it is important to keep an eye out for those because there's probably a fairly significant number of them. And the cost savings you can find with just the sheer low-use titles, but not necessarily a high cost per use, is worth your time to look for. I also would like to make the point that there are other things, there are other ways besides just cost per use to look at it, and one of the some of those things include citations and impact factors. Ivy Anderson at the California Digital Library has done a lot about not only adding in those impact factors, but also weighting them for different disciplines. And I think I would strongly encourage you to look at what Ivy's done. But I think her methodology is most suited for large research libraries and library systems that negotiate their packages, their serials together. I think just doing straightforward cost per use analysis is probably going to be an effective tool for most colleges and universities without going through that extra trouble. So how do we do this? We're lucky that this has become a lot easier over the past few years. There's been some tools that have made this possible. One of the things is without having a module or some kind of service that will go out and get your sushi compliant will go out and get grab the publisher's the use data from the publisher platform. You're stuck doing it all on your own. And so if you're looking at managing your serials in this way, it's worth your trouble to look at one of these, look at a vendor to do this service for you and to aggregate these things all in one place. Here's a list of just some of the options that are out there. Serial Solutions, their 360 counter product is what we've been using. PubGet, they have a paper stats module that will help you with both gathering and analyzing the data. That's pretty new. Some ILS vendors, the e-resource management module can do some of this work for you. Again, as long as it has that sushi compliant sushi operability, it should be able to go to the publishers and grab the use data that you need. The advantage of that is also that's probably where your cost data is as well within the ILS. Some subscription agents offer this service as well, and there still is the old-fashioned way of getting this all, going to the publishers, getting this all yourself and kind of mashing it all together in Excel, which is how we did this before we had Serial Solutions, but only in very limited and targeted ways. So having something like having one of these stats modules has really made this a very effective project for us and something we can now do on an annual basis. So that's really worth noting. So what we're talking about is, so this is what it looks like within Serial Solutions when we go to run the reports. I've highlighted the two reports that we use for generating cost per use to do the analysis. The first is just the journal holdings report, the counter JR1, and this is a number of successful full-text article requests by month and journal. The second one is the zero usage report, which is it's a separate report. So journals that have no usage do not appear in that JR1, and I'll show you an example of how this all looks. One of the things we need to do, and it's not an insignificant part of the process, is upload our cost data into Serial Solutions. So that we're still doing all our invoicing through our ILS. So that is part of the process, is that the Serial Solutions is only going out and getting the use data for us. It's up to us to put that cost data into the module. So we've put all of our data into our stats module, and it's gone and collected the use data for us. So now it's just simply a matter, and I put simply in quotes, of analyzing that data. What happens, so what you're looking at is the results table. I've kind of trimmed it down a bit so it fits on the screen well. It does have titles and platform information that appears to the left of where the ISSNs are. You can see across the top we do this for 3 years. One of the reasons for that, well, there's a couple of reasons. We thought 3 years would be a sufficient time period, a sufficient amount of time for if there are new subscriptions, also to catch use if there is a course that's offered irregularly, so that just so we know, just to make sure we aren't cutting things glibly. And I think this 3-year time period has been is sufficient. So you see, we have I just run this report for 2008, 9, and 10. For each year, you can see we have the number of uses, the title cost, and this is generating automatically the cost per use. One of the things to consider about this is the counter data is for calendar years, so it runs for each of those that is a calendar year, January to December. We of course run on a fiscal year that runs July to June, and so one of the tricky things, actually, it's nice that Serial Solutions is able to do this for us. It essentially prorates the cost data so that it's turning our fiscal year payment, so it's taking 6 months of the last 6 months of the previous fiscal year and the first 6 months of the current fiscal year to make up the calendar year. And that's not that big of a deal, but it is nice, and the one thing, it can cause a little bit of confusion if you're checking this against your invoice payments. The numbers might not match exactly. So I want to show you that there's 3 examples I've highlighted here. The green one is I want to start with the red one. The red is an example of a straightforward cancellation. It's a high cost per use. You can see for each of the 3 years, for 2008, it's around $260, $185 in 2009, $135 in 2010. This is just a straightforward, this would be targeted for cancellation. The green one above it, the second one, is you'll see the absence of data there. And this is where we need to look at that zero usage report. This is one of the problems, is that you can't run cost per use with a 0 because you try to divide a number by 0 and it gives you an error. So this is one of the tricky things that comes out in 2 different reports, and you have to compile them together. So that green one is actually an example where that use data does exist for 2008 and 2010. It just resides somewhere else. The bluish purple line there down in the middle of the page is an example of where some thought would need. If we set the overall cost per use on that is $96, which is pretty high. But if you look at each of the individual years, you'll notice that it's high for 2008, over $160, and high for 2010, close to $125. But for 2009, it's a little over $50. And this is where kind of trying to make decisions around, are you doing it for an average over 3 years, or are you looking at it across 3 years? And we were definitely doing the latter, because to me this is an indication that the journal is probably being used for one specific course. And this is something we would make sure to preserve. And one of the reasons I wanted to make that point is that this isn't, when you do these cost per use studies, you can't just start lopping things off above that number. You do really have to take some time and get into it. So like I said, even with using the Serial Solutions, which has really helped us, it definitely is much quicker, especially than having to go out to the individual publishers. We still need to pull all that data together. We export the data out of Serial Solutions and put it into a single spreadsheet. You have to look at redundancies and either consolidate them or remove them, besides things like having to integrate the zero usage report with the JR1. You also may see stats where some stats are being provided by the platform and some are being provided by the publisher, and they may not match. These can be real head scratchers. So this is actually still a fairly time-consuming process, and takes some real due diligence to make sure that the data means what it's actually telling you. So once we've gotten that together, we simply ID the low use and the high cost per use titles. For us, we've set the low use at below less than 10 uses per year. High cost per use, we've set that at around $100. We definitely have a little wiggle room around that. Some people might think about, you might want to look at what your ILL costs and set it close to that. So that might bring it down to about $30 or $50 there. But if you start cutting it down that much, you might think of what effect that might have on your ILL unit. There might be increased demand, so you really need to see what the total number of uses are and what that increase would mean, and whether your ILL unit could actually keep up with that level of demand. So once we've done that, we identify the titles. I go through and assign the subject areas to them and send them to the subject specialist review. We definitely do allow exceptions to be made. Sometimes it may be a new subject area, so that there's just waiting, kind of more momentum needs to be built up. Sometimes it may be just a subject area that is important to us, but we just don't have a lot of coverage, and so we may just want to keep that journal just to make sure we have something in that area. Once we do that, then we present it out to faculty for comment, and I'm going to say more about this part about how we send it out to faculty at the end. And now I'm going to turn it over to Deborah, and she's going to talk about doing the same kind of analysis and negotiation for big deals.
Okay, so so we hear a lot of folks, I would say, complaining about being stuck in a big deal, and I think that I'm going to show you what you can do to evaluate your big deal and decide whether it's really of value to you, or do you have another option, especially if the publisher makes their articles available on some kind of a pay-per-view, which is increasingly available. So I'm going to go over this fairly quickly. The nice thing about the big deal is that it's giving you all of the data that you need to understand what your costs would be if you had a pay-per-view, a combination of subscriptions and pay-per-view. Because a big deal, you've already opened it up, so you already know what your maximum use might be if there were no barriers to use. So that's the really good thing about moving from a big deal to something else, is that you have a pretty good idea of what your costs are going to be. So the first thing you need to do is you need list price cost. So right now for your big deal, you have a special price that's been set for you, but you actually need to know what the list price of all the journals are in that package, and you can get that usually at the publisher site. So you should go and pull down the list price in an Excel file, and you need your use data, and you need to pull your use data down into an Excel file. And like Steve mentioned, it's probably better to do that with at least 3 years of use data and then average it out, or compile it all and then divide it over the 3-year period. So now you have 2 Excel spreadsheets that are separate. You have cost on one spreadsheet, and you have use data on another. And you do need to use Microsoft Access or some other kind of database probably to combine those costs and merge the data together. So I'm not going to go over that here, but if folks are interested, I have a very simple instruction sheet on how to use Microsoft Access to merge that data, and I'd be happy to include that with the slides to the presentation. So now that you've merged your cost and your use data, this is list price cost and use, you want to calculate the cost per use of each title. So you divide your cost by your use, and then you have a giant spreadsheet, and I have a sample here, and you see my row that says SNP. So I've sort of snipped out to make it fit into this slide huge chunks of data. But you get an idea of what the data would look like. So you have to sort your data by cost per use from the lowest cost per use to highest. And then you have to set a cutoff point, and that cutoff point would probably be based on what your alternatives are. If you didn't have the big deal, and you had a combination of subscriptions and something else, what would the cost of the something else be? And for this example, I've used $24 as the cutoff point because in this example, the articles from this publisher are available for $24 per article through the Copyright Clearance Center's Get It Now program. So I've used $24 as the cutoff point here. So you can see that that first tan line, cost for title subscriptions, I've found my breaking point of $24, and I've totaled the list prices for subscriptions that are less than that cost per use. And so I would suggest that all of the titles under $24 cost per use should be subscribed to. And the total cost for list price subscriptions to those titles is $159,000. And then below that line are all the titles that you would cancel or that would not be included in your access. And you would have to have access to those through some sort of a pay-per-view, ILL, or some other alternative access. And so you have the data that would show you what the maximum cost probably would be, what the cost would be if there were no barriers. And so if you set up an alternative that had no barriers, then you would expect that your pay-per-view cost would be the same use amount times whatever the cost of the pay-per-view is. And in this case, at $24 an article with the use that we see here, that would mean our pay-per-view use would be $445,824. And so if I add up the cost for title subscriptions with the cost for possible pay-per-view, then the value is $605,000, which is a lot more than we're paying for this big deal. And so for us, this big deal is a very good deal. But some other big deals at some other institutions might clearly not be a big deal, and it's definitely worth reviewing it in this way. Now, this is a purely empirical and financial analysis of a big deal. You may feel that there are other factors for you to consider in considering subscribing or canceling to a big deal. So I encourage you to look at other sources of information on this. There was an e-forum from the ALCTS division in October of 2011 where many of these issues were discussed. And you can find a more nuanced discussion of the topic in the archive for that e-forum. So I'm going to talk a little bit about alternatives, some of the alternatives to subscriptions. The institutional pay-per-view is something that I'll talk about over the next couple of slides, and we'll get into some detail on that. But some of the other alternatives that are available are negotiating with publishers based on your cost per use analysis. In my experience, trying to do this negotiation is most effective if you first process the cancellation, submit it through your subscription agent, and then when your account rep contacts you to find out why you've canceled all these journals, you're in a nice position to be able to talk with him about what value you see those journals having at your institution. And I have found that effective in some cases. In some cases, I've received discounts on subscriptions from using this argument. But that's not always effective. And even when it's not effective, I think it's an important strategy for us to be upfront with the publishers about, because it's important for them to understand that this is how we're evaluating subscriptions at this point. Of course, access through full-text databases is another option. This is a very good option when you're looking at titles that are print-only. If you have titles that are print-only and they are also available through a full-text database, you might want to take a look at the title-level use in those databases, because probably most of your use is through the full-text databases, and you may be able to cancel some of the print on those. also, with the full-text databases, if you have a journal subscription and access through a full-text database, depending on what the priority is in your link resolver, you may be seeing higher use for that journal through the full-text database and not through the subscription. And then that becomes an interesting question about whether the full-text database is really sufficient for what you need. So when full-text databases first became available, librarians were sort of shy about canceling title-level subscriptions and replacing them with database access for a variety of reasons, including whether the coverage would be complete, access to most current issues, access to images and graphs, and reliability of access, whether journals might disappear suddenly. Now we've had lots of experience with these databases, and we've seen some improvement on some of these issues, and there's a little more willingness to move in that direction. There are two very good articles that were put out by Chambers and Sprague that address some of these issues, and I encourage you, if you're interested in this topic, to look at what they've done. Interlibrary loan has really has had some very dramatic improvements over the last 5 to 10 years. Now at Wellesley, our article delivery averages 11 hours. The delivery of the article arrives 11 hours after the request, and that's our average. Of course, ILL is not free. There are staff costs, and there are copyright fees, and these things all need to be considered. But interlibrary loan is really an excellent option now. The temporary reductions, I'm just going to say very little about this. So some of the big deals are priced based on your value as a customer. We have had some success in lowering our value as a customer by making cancellations, which have a temporary impact on the community. And then we've, after the required number of years, joined the big deal at a much, much, much lower rate than was originally proposed. And it's a risky thing to try, and it has an impact on a lot of people, but it is something that you might want to consider, whether it's something that you could do. And individual faculty subscriptions, we're a very small school. We have some departments that are very small that use journals in a very minimal way, and we have worked with the faculty to provide them with their individual subscriptions to journals where we could not provide an institutional access to journals. And we've done this in a legal way, and it's something that for us has been effective because of the size of our school and our programs. So I'm going to talk in a little more depth about institutional pay-per-view. This is really, really an area that I think is growing and that is going to be a big part of our future. And we've had experience with this for 3 years at here at Wellesley, and we've tried a few different things, and some things have worked well and some things haven't worked. Some of the institutional pay-per-view options are direct from the publisher. Wiley and Elsevier offer pay-per-view. Informa Health just recently came out with a pay-per-view option. I believe IEEE Explore has a pay-per-view option. There may be others, and you know, if you want to tweet those, that might be a helpful thing for people to see using the hashtag for this event. And there are aggregators that provide this service. So Ingenta, of course, has provided the service for a number of years, and we've tried Ingenta. We don't currently use it as a document delivery source, but it's definitely a very viable option. And there's a new program from the Copyright Clearance Center called Get It Now that is very, very promising. We have not deployed it here. We're waiting for a few other publishers to join, but it's something we're paying very close attention to, and we're very happy to see happening. So some of the risks of using an institutional pay-per-view, and then some of the ways that you might be able to control costs. Some of the risks are you really don't have any way to predict what you might possibly spend unless you're moving from a big deal to a pay-per-view, and then you would have a better sense of it. Terms could change unexpectedly, and we've had that experience with Wiley. The pricing per article has changed. Some of the licensing terms have changed. With Ingenta, we had a big surprise. when they pulled all of their aerial content with, I think, no notice at all. So it can be kind of risky, and sometimes it's time-intensive to track your pay-per-view and make sure that it's still working for you in a cost-effective way. But you do have some options, and it depends on the program that you're using. Some of the vendors provide you with different options for controlling cost. Most offer the, you have your own control within your institution about what you want to expose in your discovery services, what you want to include in your link resolver or your catalog. So if you only want to expose 20 titles and not the 2,000 titles that are available, that might be one way to control costs. Some offer mediation so that any requests have to be authorized by a librarian. And one very effective way that is becoming, I think, less available, but Ingenta does provide this, is to display the cost. And we have found this to be very, very effective. This is not charging the end user. It is only letting the end user know that somebody is paying something for this article and that your library is paying this money. And this, we have seen, is a very effective way of reducing the number of uses of pay-per-view. So, let's see. Okay, so this is our experience with one of our pay-per-view accounts. The chart here shows our expenses to this particular publisher in 2008 through 2011. The different colors show the percent of that expense that is either subscriptions or tokens. And so you can see that in 2008 we started with our cost to this publisher were $150,000. In 2009 we started canceling subscriptions and replacing access with tokens. And we, over the years, have reduced our spend with this publisher by 41%. And we've increased access from 500 titles. So in 2008 we subscribed to 500 titles from this publisher. When we turned on tokens, we turned on access to all of the titles, including the back files and the front files. And so we've increased our access from 500 titles to over 1,800 titles. And we've reduced our costs by 41%. So we see this as a really big win for us and for our patrons who've been very happy to have such expanded access.
All right, so I'm going to talk about communicating this, the changes to the faculty, to the user community. Mostly this is the kinds of cancellations. They generally affect faculty more in our student population, and that's mainly who we address our communications to when we work through this. Some of this is very obvious. The liaisons, our subject liaisons, will work closely with the departments. This has been true especially for the sciences where, we all know it's just because of the high costs involved, it needs to be managed more closely. Often, one thing I'll say, and for the social sciences and the humanities, at least on our campus, is a lot of this has actually been communications with direct liaison communications with individual faculty members. That is, if there was a requester for a specific title, that was something that had been requested 10 years ago, and now we're seeing that it has no use. Talking with them about it specifically, is that just not an area they teach in anymore? Has it been replaced by something else? We also, when we start the annual review process, especially when we did this, the big one 2 years ago, we were very upfront about this is giving them a heads up that this is something that was happening. It wasn't just when they got an email, it wasn't just them getting an email about here's what's going to be canceled. They knew to expect this. We did this a few weeks out in advance, and so that way when the list went out, it wasn't news to them. So we really want this to be, we really have worked for it to be a very open process. And but again, one of the things I would stress is we've tried to deal with the faculty as directly as possible. I don't know if your campus has kind of like internet discussion groups or something like that. I wouldn't post we've avoided posting just general announcements to lists like that because often that's just a place where people can get riled up and misinformation can be spread. So we've really tried to target faculty as directly as possible with direct communications. Excuse me. The other thing too is when we email the faculty and let them know the list is going to be available, we've not only provided the titles that we're nominating for cancellation, we also provide the rationale for that cancellation. We actually provide the use and cost per use data so they can see the decision behind it. We've also been working to make sure that they know what kind of alternative access there'll be. For many of these, again, this is especially true in the social sciences and humanities, is that there is alternative access. At least many of these titles are in JSTOR, so it may not be current access, but it may be 5 years and later or 3 years and later, with either something like a less dependable aggregator like LexisNexis or Academic Search Complete, or just making it up through ILL. So we've tried to make that part just as visible to the faculty as possible, and I think it's made. We've done it. We're going into our 3rd year, and compared to when we did our last journal cancellation in the whatever 8 or 9 years ago, I think it made a real big difference, not only showing them the rationale for the decisions and showing them the alternative access. Generally speaking, we've had very, very positive response from the faculty. There have been, occasionally we do get some people contesting it or arguing about our use data. It's brought up some interesting issues from faculty to claim to be using their partner's login at Research University X or something like that, so their use isn't accurately reflected. And so we tell them that you have to use your Wellesley account, otherwise we won't know that it's being used. And but generally, like I said, when presenting this information as openly as possible, we also provided in a spreadsheet that they could download and sort in any way, so they could just look at it and drill into it. The other point, though, is we feel there's no need to communicate invisible changes, and these are things like going from a direct subscription to tokens, for example. That is, they still have direct access through the catalog. If we do a cancellation from a direct subscription of something that appears in Project Muse, for example, we don't communicate that. So these are really just cancellations where the full, complete access to that subscription is going to be limited in some way. And like I said, we've really tried to be open about it, and I think just presenting the data along with the nominated titles has made the process, I think, a lot easier for the faculty to get a handle on.
And the other thing is, if you're doing this not because of a budget restriction, but if you're just doing good management of your journals and you're able to add journals, then you're able to communicate both the cancellations and the additions at the same time, and that really makes the communication a lot easier as well. So I think that's it. We do have a few questions that came in, but if you have other questions, we're really interested to hear what you have to say. And we do have still 15 minutes for questions, so that's a good amount of time. So we're going to address a couple of the questions that came in, but I'd first like to ask, is that asked, how do you display the cost? If you could elaborate on that question, because I don't understand what the question means. So the question we're going to address first is, please describe more about the legal ways that you handle individual and faculty subscriptions and whether you still list your access in the catalog or link resolver, and do you store them in the library? So store them in the library, I think that you must be referring to print, and we're generally not subscribing to print. Even if it's an individual faculty thing, we're just giving them, paying for their access to the e-content. So, but I think the question still, if it were a print subscription, then I would say no, we would not be storing it in the library because we don't really want to deal with that, and it wouldn't really be a legitimate use of an individual subscription. We do not put those titles in the link resolver or the catalog, and we work very closely. We work very closely with the faculty in the couple of very small departments that we do this for, and we make sure that the faculty understand that this is an individual subscription. They have a personal password to it, and we advise them that they should not share their password with anyone. They should not share their password with fellow faculty members, and they should not share their password with students. In these departments that I've worked with, they assure me that the students in those departments use very little journal literature in their studies, and that when they do use journal literature, it is when a faculty member assigns it to them, and so the faculty are confident that they are able to work with the students to find the papers that the students need and then share those papers with the students on that sort of individual level, which is within their right to do. So that's some detail around that, and we are very careful to try and do that in a way that's legal. The other question, and I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get to this other question. Okay. The other question is, I keep hearing about accreditation standards. Do you factor this in your decisions? Do you?
It's never. I've heard of this. I've heard people discuss this, but it's never been an issue for us. And I think one of the reasons we've never had, like especially a departmental review, no one's ever approached us about like cancel, the fact that we've canceled key journals or that we don't have enough of that to support that discipline, for example, and just definitely like at the accreditation for the college level, it's not come up. I think the reasons for that is because it goes back to that second slide of we've made 650 cancellations, but we've added 4,000 titles, and we're still supporting. If we look at it, we're actually supporting the community on campus better than we were 3 years ago. So and I don't think, and we have been careful again. We try to look out and making sure we're not gutting any particular discipline or subject area, and we just haven't seen that where, for example, like religion, that there wouldn't be any use or something, we would end up canceling all their journals. We just haven't seen that. The cancellations have actually been fairly across the board, or in a few instances, there have been some departments that were more aggressive about trying to get new subscriptions, and they'd actually become kind of bloated. So, so I think in terms of accreditation, we've just never reached that point, is what I can say.
But I can speak more directly to the chemistry accreditation, because the chemistry accreditation I think is a little bit different. So chemistry departments are accredited by the American Chemical Society, and they do have stipulations in there about access to journal literature, and they have a list of titles that you have to subscribe to, a certain number of titles from this list, many of which are published by the American Chemical Society. So it's a very controversial topic. But my understanding of that accreditation document is that it says something sort of vague. It does not say that you have to subscribe to these journals. It says that you have to provide like ready access or something like that. You have to be able to provide easy access to these titles. And I think at the minimum here, an interlibrary loan delivery rate of 10 hours is certainly easy access to those titles. So even that very strict accreditation, I think we can work around that at this point because article delivery is so good through IOL.
So we have a couple of questions on pay-per-view. One is when we're showing the article cost of pay-per-view, how is that displayed? and the other is, are we doing mediated or unmediated? And if unmediated, how do we control costs? Deborah, do you want to?
Okay, so we generally do unmediated. We do an unmediated PDA, pay-per-view at this point. We want to be able to provide access without any boundaries to that, without any barriers to that access. Not boundaries, but barriers. And so we are satisfied with the pay-per-view cost that we're paying now. If we saw a dramatic increase in that pay-per-view cost, we would probably not mediate, but we might consider changing access through the link resolver or something like that. But at this point, we really have it's unmediated, and we provide links to the titles through all of our discovery points.
For the cost, when we display the costs of the pay-per-use, how is that displayed?
So the question is, how do you display the cost? How does the user know the cost of the article in the case of pay-per-view? Oh, okay. So oftentimes this is not an option at all. Within Genta, it's the default option that the cost shows to the patron. So it's most of the times it's just dependent on what the vendor provides. The Copyright Clearance Center has an interest. They have lots of different ways of controlling the service. And one interesting way that they're suggesting is a nuisance fee, so that the patron themselves has to pay some sort of small nuisance fee. And we don't like that idea. I don't think we would do that here. But I think if we could even just have the cost of the article displayed, that would lower the use enough. Okay. So we have another question. Okay. What ILL systems do we use? We use Rapid. We use Iliad. And so mostly the really excellent, so those are our article delivery options, but really Rapid is the system that we're doing a lot in. But Rapid and Iliad, and then we have some local consortia as well for returnables. Yeah. Okay, so another question, you talked about getting individual list prices for journals that are part of a package. In a case like Academic Search Complete, which is a full-text database, how would you go about getting list prices for those titles? So I was not referring to full-text databases. I was referring to big deals, and the big deals are generally all-you-can-eat packages from one publisher. So I do not know how you might get list prices on every title in Academic Search Complete. So we have a question, do you limit the number of articles for each patron so that it does not get abused? No, we don't have any limits, although in Genta did allow some of that. You could set those kinds of limits, and it's possible that when we were using in Genta, we might have set some limits like that, but we never had any kind of trouble like that. Emma asks, I'm unfamiliar with the term token. Is this another word for pay-per-view? Tokens are Wiley Blackwell's pay-per-view. They're called Article Select Tokens, and it's a program that we use here. And so sometimes we slip into the shorthand of tokens. With pay-per-view, how is it clear to the patron that she is not the one liable for the cost? So most of the time, there is no cost showing. With Ingenta, the cost was visible. It was sometimes confusing to the patron that they were not responsible for the cost, but they were never asked for a credit card or any kind of payment, and so thus they should have been able to figure out that they were not paying the cost. What do we estimate our ILL transaction to be? We use a general, I use a general $30, but of course it's different based on copyright fees, based on each title. But I generally use $30 as just an estimate to do this analysis.
And like I said, we tried to stay way above that limit when we were looking at cost per use. We set it $100, and we stayed there just because it just looks like when we start dropping it even down to something like 75, generally the number of uses for most journals, the average number of uses seem to go up. It seems to be making a significantly deeper cut, and just the fears about throwing more, the barriers to access, and also just putting more work onto ILL. So we've been fairly conservative about that, but I think for us it's worked well.
So Constance has asked an excellent question. I'm so happy she asked this question. It's, did you experience a big increase in Wiley token use when they changed the message that came with using a token? And I had this in my notes for the session today that I skipped it because of time. And yes, you can. So in 2010, Wiley changed their platform, and with that platform change, they changed the wording that shows to the patron when the patron goes to use a token. And so you can see in 2010 and 2011 on this graph that we did have an increase in cost. And I think that it's because of that change in wording. And so I'm looking through my notes here. So the change in wording, the previous wording when a patron tried to use to view an article was, your library will pay a fee for access to this article. Do you really want this article? And there was a yes and a no button. And the new wording is, select the confirm option to access the article. All users at Wellesley College will have access to this article for 24 hours. And I think this is a big change. And we did see a really big increase. And I'll tell you, I was very nervous about it for the first 6 months, but we've seen it level off now, and I think that we're going to be okay with that. So this answers the next question. With pay-per-view, if an article is purchased, is that then permanent access? With Wiley, it is 24-hour access, so anyone in the institution can use that article within 24 hours without incurring another cost. But for each vendor, it would probably be a different policy. Any concerns with perpetual access?
There are some, but I think because we're talking about this presentation and putting it together, and I know we're almost out of time, but I think the e-access, and this comes up with ebooks as well, and doing patron-driven acquisition is, the idea that we don't need to manage necessarily long runs, and it's not about, it's if we're not using it now, and again, we're not a research library. I just have to emphasize that point. But if it's not being used, do we need any greater access to it? Do we need perpetual access to it? And will we be able to pick it up when we do? It does worry me a little bit if it was a subject area that we dropped and then it kind of came back again, and we'd have to pick up that subscription and some kind of archive, of the back file if it's not available through JSTOR or periodicals online or something like that. So there's some concerns, but I largely think we've let go of that. Would you agree, or?
Yeah.
No. So I mean, not too much. It is kind of a hard thing to get over, but yeah.
So I think we're out of time. There are some additional questions, and we can try and answer those. I don't know. We'll talk with the webinar organizers to figure out how we're going to answer those.
Yes, we'll get you to answer those in writing, and we'll send them out to the attendees. Okay?
Great. Thank you very much.
Now, Steve, or Wade, if you'll, yep, you're one step ahead of me. I'm getting back to my screen. If I can just advance my slide. There. Oops. Well, I'm not getting my screen back. It's up, but show my screen. Well, I'm not getting my screen back, but we'll go ahead and close up anyway. Deborah and Steve gave us a lot to think about this afternoon, and on behalf of the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee, I thank them for sharing their excellent ideas, insights, and experiences. I do want to make a correction to what I said at the beginning. Steve and Deborah are going to make one correction to their PowerPoint slides, and so they will be sent to you on Friday. However, the recording link will be sent out to you today. I also want to thank all the attendees for coming today. The committee hopes that you found today's session useful and that you will join us again for future ALCTS webinars or perhaps access webinars that were presented in the past. Both upcoming and past webinars can be accessed from the ALCTS website. You will soon receive a short online evaluation form. Please take a few minutes to respond to the questions. Your feedback is valuable to the ALCTS committee as the members plan new continuing education offerings. Finally, I wish to thank Wade Wyckoff for providing technical support for today's webinar. ALCTS webinars couldn't take place without a team effort for the presenters, the ALCTS committee, and its tech support volunteers, as well as Julie Reese and Alyssa Novak from the ALCTS office. Thank you again for joining us this afternoon, and we hope you will participate in other ALCTS events in the future.